Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and while most of the characters on Adventure Time deal with some sort of tragedy, most of them at least have a happy ending. The main exception to this is probably the most tragic character on Adventure Time, Betty Groff. So the point of this video is to analyze Betty's character arc and discuss why I think her ending was bleaker than everyone else's. Betty was Simon's girlfriend before he put on the crown, turning him into the Ice King. In Season 5, when Ice King reverts back into Simon after losing his magic, he uses time travel to say goodbye to Betty one last time, though Betty ends up jumping into the present, which is why she mysteriously disappeared back then. Though because the magic was what was keeping Simon alive, Betty needs to restore the crown and make him the Ice King again. She does this, but with the intent of turning him back into Simon again. Notice how not only did Betty never actually get to know the Ice King, at least not at this point in the series, but bringing him back into the present was proven to be impossible without him dying. Betty is so obsessed with the past that she is literally trying to achieve the impossible. The next time we see Betty, she's meeting up with Magic Man in order to gain his magic. As she states, magic is actually made up of a combination of both depression and insanity. The only way for Betty to get Simon back is for her to gain Magic Man's depression and insanity, and through a confusing sequence of events, she does. Betty is literally sacrificing her mental health in order to bring Simon back. Betty manages to get a hold of Simon's crown, and uses her magic to program the crown into turning the Ice King back into Simon. This backfires, however, when the Simon that lives inside the crown ends up getting through to her. I guess you could say that at least a version of Betty got a happy ending. To me, this is the point where Betty crossed the line. Physically manipulating someone's brain in order for them to be the person you want them to be. I don't know, do you think that might be going a bit too far? Let's contrast this with the way that Marceline handles the Ice King. Marceline used to be in the same boat as Betty, not liking the way that the Ice King is and wanting him to be Simon again. However, Marceline grew to appreciate the Ice King for who he is. She accepts him and tries forming a bond with him, taking comfort in the fact that there is still just a little bit of Simon still left in him, even stating that she still loves and cares about him. As for Betty, on the other hand, she tries to recreate the past in order for the Ice King to remember that he's Simon. Obviously, this backfires, causing Betty to freak out. However, this is where Betty gets very important advice from Tiny Manicore, to accept that the Ice King is the way he is and try to be friends with that guy. And that kinda works for a while. Throughout the Elements miniseries, Betty and Ice King actually seem to be getting along quite nicely. All until one very important scene. When it seems like there is no hope left, Ice King gives a speech that actually reminds her of Simon. For the first time in years, Betty was looking at someone who was actually somewhat familiar to her. He goes straight from that to asking her about mashed potatoes. This utter whiplash in emotions made Betty wake up and realize that the person she's talking to is not, and never will be, Simon. Unlike Marceline or even Finn in later seasons, Betty isn't able to accept the Ice King for who he is. This is further shown to us in Season 10's Temple of Mars. In this episode, Betty is presented with a memory of herself from about a week before she was going to go on a trip that would advance her career. As it turns out, Betty never actually went on the trip due to meeting Simon the day after. Germaine then tells Betty that her obsession with Simon is unhealthy and that she should be focusing more on herself. This causes Betty to change the plane tickets from next week to that day. Now, none of this was actually real, so it's not like Betty actually changed anything, but it would have been a good metaphor for her focusing more on herself and not as much on Simon. It would have been a good metaphor for that if that's what Betty had taken from it. What she did end up taking from it was that she should be working harder to get Simon back because that's what Finn would do. She is incapable of seeing the fact that she has to move on from Simon and is instead focusing on something else. Thus, she plans to summon Golb, leading to the finale. Due to being trapped inside of Golb, Betty and Ice King are broken down into their most simple forms, meaning that yes, Ice King is now Simon again. Finn and Simon are able to escape Golb due to a hole made through the other characters' harmony. Betty stays, however, due to the crown being in its most primal wishing form, and she needs that in order to defeat Golb. At first, she wishes for Golb to disappear. This doesn't work due to Golb being too powerful. So instead, Betty just wishes for the power to keep Simon safe, which causes her to infuse with Golb. Sure, Simon is back, just like how he used to be, but in order for that to have happened, Betty had to change. And boy did she change. The reason why Betty's arc ended the way it did was because Betty needed to let go of the past. She had to accept the fact that things change and embrace the new life she has. And sure, in the end, Betty got her Simon back. But at what cost?